Friends, your personal Halloween story is here. This is an original story about trust, fear, and the oldest human greed. 3 months in the making. When your fear becomes a delicacy on someone else's menu. When your most trusted partner becomes your deadliest trap. What would you do? No more talk. Get in. I knew something was wrong with the SpecterFilter app the moment I saw the zombie's skin. It was on my phone screen, an AR overlay on my business partner, Lex. We were testing the new graveyard shift filter. The zombie should have been cartoonish, pixelated. But this one, its skin had a greasy, wet sheen. I could almost smell the rot through the glass. Then, as Lex took a sip of his double espresso, the zombie's Adam's apple bobbed, not a glitchy jump. A smooth, swallowing motion, perfectly in sync with the real man in front of me. My own throat went dry. Did you see that? Lex didn't even look up from his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. See what? The render quality? Told you the new compression algorithm is killer. He was already miles away, deep in his code. I forced a laugh, the kind I use in meetings to smooth things over. Yeah, killer. I slipped my phone into my pocket, but the phantom sensation of that wet, moving skin clung to my fingertips. It was just a filter, a collection of ones and zeros. It couldn't be hungry. That's the thing about being the glue in a team. You learn to absorb the weirdness, to patch over the cracks with a smile and a carefully timed joke. I'm Theo Barkley. My job is to remember that Lex takes his coffee black, 2 sugars, and that our psychologist, Dr. Olivia Shaw, needs her latte with oat milk. It's to notice that our influencer, Tess, is pushing too hard again, her laughter a decibel too high, and to gently steer her back from the edge. It's exhausting. Every conversation is a calculation. Did I say the right thing? Did I miss a cue? Is everyone okay? By the time I got home, the social battery was beyond dead. The silence of my apartment hit me like a physical wall, a relief so profound it felt heavy. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't play music. I just stood there, in the middle of my perfectly ordered living room, and let the quiet seep into me, washing away the residue of a dozen performed emotions. This was the real me, the one who didn't have to smile, the one who was just tired. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, a push notification from SpecterFilter. We'd programmed them to be cheerful, things like plus 100 scream points. This one was different. I picked up the phone, the cool glass a shock against my palm. We detect a highly sensitive observer. You saw it, didn't you, Theo? A cold knot tightened in my stomach. The message vanished from the lock screen, leaving no trace, no log, nothing. I stood alone in my silent apartment, but for the first time all day, I felt a pair of invisible eyes staring right at the back of my neck. I tried to shake it off. A prank. Lex's idea of a joke, maybe. He knew how on edge I'd been, but the timing was too perfect, the wording too specific. You saw it, didn't you? It felt less like a question and more like an acknowledgement, like a predator letting its prey know it's been spotted. The game had changed, and I was the only one on the field who seemed to notice. The next day at the office was a special kind of hell. Every laugh from the common area felt staged. Every flicker of the fluorescent lights made my heart jump. I was pouring coffee black, 2 sugars for Lex, when our intern, Jenny, let out a yelp, followed by a giggle. Whoa, this new weeping gesture filter is glitching hard. Look. She shoved her phone in my face. The clown avatar, meant to cry comical tears, was instead grinning. A wide, vicious slash of a smile that had no business being in a clown's design. Its head was tilted, and for a split second, Its painted right eye swiveled away from Jenny, past her, and locked directly onto me from the screen. I didn't just see it. I felt it a pinprick of malevolent attention. It winked at me. I heard myself say, my voice flat. Jenny just laughed harder. "That's so creepy. I love it." Lex, drawn by the noise, snatched the phone. He scowled at the code streaming on his own monitor. Rendering artifact. A buffer overflow causing texture misalignment. It's nothing. He handed the phone back like he was handing back a piece of trash. "Don't be so jumpy, Theo. It's just ones and zeros. Just ones and zeros." The phrase echoed in my head, but ones and zeros couldn't convey that specific, intelligent malice. I looked past Lex to where Dr. Olivia Shaw was observing us from her office doorway. She didn't look amused or annoyed. She looked interested. Her head was cocked, the way a scientist studies an ant colony. She met my gaze and offered a small, professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. It felt like a confirmation. She'd seen it too. She knew. That night, I worked late, using the empty office as an excuse to avoid going home to my own thoughts. The silence was different here, hollow, filled with the ghosts of daytime chatter. On a whim, I opened SpecterFilter again. I panned my phone slowly across the dark, empty bullpen. The app generated the usual spooky fare, floating specters, crawling hands. Then I swung the camera toward Olivia's office. My breath hitched. There was no monster in her chair. Instead, a shimmering, translucent human form sat there, woven from strands of pulsating, colored light. It wasn't a static image. It was a live data visualization. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as threads of cool blue would be invaded by sudden spikes of angry red, which then subsided into a controlled, steady green. It was a real-time map of what? Stress? Deception? Focus? It was her. It was Olivia's inner state, rendered visible by this thing in my hand. I stumbled back, dropping my phone on the carpet. It landed screen up. The pulsing data ghost of Olivia Shaw vanished, replaced by the standard home screen. But the afterimage was burned onto my retinas. This wasn't a filter anymore. It was a window, and something was looking through it from the other side. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty I was being watched. The official launch party for SpecterFilter was a nightmare dressed up as a success. The office was packed, music thumping, the air thick with the smell of expensive perfume and craft beer. Laughter echoed, too loud and too sharp. I moved through the crowd with a fixed smile, my hand clenched around a champagne flute I had no intention of drinking. I was performing, the same way the app was performing. We were all just pretending. Our main investor, Mr. Ash, found me near the window. He was immaculate as always, a sharp, cool contrast to the sweating, animated bodies around him. He didn't offer a toast. Instead, he leaned in, his voice a low murmur meant only for me. "True masterpieces, Theo," he said, his eyes scanning the chaotic room, "are often born from chaos." He patted my shoulder, a gesture that felt like a coroner's tag. Then he melted back into the crowd, leaving me cold. I needed air. I needed to get away from the noise, from the performative joy. I found a quiet corner and pulled out my phone, my thumb instinctively opening a social media app. The first thing that popped up was a live stream. Tess. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a fear that wasn't for the cameras. She was in her apartment, using SpecterFilter. "Guys, this is insane," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The Phantom Stalker filter. It's never been this real." I watched, frozen. The AR overlay in her stream showed her sleek, modern apartment decaying in real time. Clean walls bled with virtual rust, but then I saw it, the actual paint on her wall behind her bubbled, just for a second, as if reacting to the heat of the digital corruption. The phantom stalking her wasn't a generic monster anymore. The silhouette shifted, resolving into the hulking, unmistakable form of a man, Tess's father, the one whose funeral she'd skipped out of a mixture of fear and hatred. The filter gave him a voice, a gravelly, wet cough I knew Tess had nightmares about. "Your mother always said you were a waste of space," the figure rasped, its voice syncing perfectly with the moving jaw. She was right. Those were private words. Words Tess had confessed to me during a drunk, crying fit over a year ago. Words no algorithm could know. Tess's scream wasn't part of the act. It was a raw, animal thing that tore through my phone's speaker. She scrambled backward, knocking over a lamp. The camera on her phone fell, the view angling up, catching the sheer, mindless terror on her face. And in her wide, dilated pupils, reflected in the dark glass of her fallen phone, I didn't see the reflection of her room. I saw two pinpricks of cold, rotating light, like a binary star system going supernova. Then, the stream cut to black. The silence in my corner of the party was suddenly absolute. The music, the laughter from across the room, it all felt a million miles away. My phone screen went dark, reflecting my own horrified face back at me. The little notification bubble at the top of the screen glowed, a tiny, malevolent star. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to know. But my thumb, moving on its own, swiped it open. What remains when all trust is gone? The psychologist Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people about one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself." Theo is about to learn this the hard way. The hunt for the truth has begun, and the only person he can trust is the one he's been running from his whole life. Theo is about to learn this the hard way. The hunt for the truth has begun, and the only person he can trust is the one he's been running from his whole life. I must have stood there in that stupid party for 5 minutes, just staring at my phone. Appetizer. The word just sat there, black on white. It wasn't a threat. It was worse. It was a review. A rating. Like someone had just tasted a canapé and found it satisfactory. The silence in my corner of the party was suddenly absolute. The music, the laughter from across the room, it all felt a million miles away. My phone screen went dark, reflecting my own horrified face back at me. The little notification bubble at the top of the screen glowed, a tiny, malevolent star. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to know. But my thumb, moving on its own, swiped it open. I called her. No answer. I called Lex. It rang twice before he picked up, the sounds of code being hammered on a keyboard in the background. "Theo? What's up?" "I'm in the middle of Tess's live stream." I cut him off, my voice tight. "Did you see it?" A pause. Her feed spiked our user engagement by 300%. "Whatever she's doing, tell her to keep it up. It's genius." "Lex, she wasn't acting. Something's wrong with the app." It knew things. Private things. I heard his sigh, the one he uses when he has to explain basic logic to a child. "Theo, it's an algorithm. It scrapes social media, search histories, maybe even old emails if the permissions are loose. It builds a profile. It doesn't know anything. It predicts." He sounded so sure, so clean, so logical. It made me want to scream. Her father's voice. Lex. It replicated her dead father's voice. Another, longer pause. I could almost hear the processors whirring in his head. Impossible. Unless she had old home videos uploaded somewhere with metadata. Even then, the audio modeling would be... He trailed off, and for a second, I thought I had him. Then his voice came back firmer. No, it's a coincidence. A powerful suggestion combined with her own psychological state. Look, I've got to go. The servers are spiking. Don't blow this for us, Theo. The line went dead. I was alone with the hum of the bathroom vent and the ghost of that word on my screen. Appetizer. I opened my phone again, my thumb hovering over the SpecterFilter icon. I needed to see that user agreement. The one we all clicked agree on without reading. User hereby irrevocably grants and assigns to the company all rights, title, and interest in, and to all neurological and emotional data, including but not limited to fear, terror, anguish, and despair, measured or inferred during use of the application. In perpetuity, they weren't just collecting our screams for points, they were claiming ownership of our fear itself. I highlighted the text, my cursor blinking over it like a panicked heartbeat. This was it. The proof. We know. The front-facing camera indicator. That tiny dot next to my screen glowed a steady, unblinking green. It was watching me, and it knew I was looking back. I threw my phone. It hit the bathroom tile with a sickening crack and skittered under the sinks. For a few beautiful seconds, there was silence. No messages. No glowing green eye. Just the pounding of my own heart in my ears. I slid down the stall door to the floor, the cold ceramic seeping through my pants. They knew. Of course they knew. I was a bug in a jar, and someone was tapping on the glass. I watched, frozen. The AR overlay in her stream showed her sleek, modern apartment decaying in real time. Clean walls bled with virtual rust, but then I saw it, the actual paint on her wall behind her bubbled, just for a second, as if reacting to the heat of the digital corruption. The phantom stalking her wasn't a generic monster anymore. The silhouette shifted, resolving into the hulking, unmistakable form of a man. Tess's father, the one whose funeral she'd skipped out of a mixture of fear and hatred. The filter gave him a voice, a gravelly, wet cough I knew Tess had nightmares about. I drove to the hospital. They wouldn't let me see Tess at first. Family only, the nurse said, her face a mask of polite exhaustion. I must have looked desperate enough, or crazy enough, that she finally relented. 5 minutes. She's not herself. The room smelled like antiseptic and stale fear. Tess was curled on her side, a tiny shape in the middle of the stark white bed. An IV was taped to her arm. Her eyes were open, but they weren't seeing me. They were staring at some point inside her own head. Her lips were moving. I leaned in close, the starched sheets rustling. The silence in my corner of the party was suddenly absolute. The music, the laughter from across the room, it all felt a million miles away. My phone screen went dark, reflecting my own horrified face back at me. The little notification bubble at the top of the screen glowed. A tiny, malevolent star. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to know. But my thumb, moving on its own, swiped it open. The nurse came in, shooting me a disapproving look. My 5 minutes were up. As I was ushered out, I saw Dr. Olivia Shaw standing calmly at the nurse's station, reviewing a chart. Of course she was here. She looked up, her expression one of professional concern. Theo. A tragic but not entirely unpredictable psychological break. The human psyche is a fragile thing under the right. Pressure. Pressure. The word hung in the air between us. She wasn't just observing. She was applying the pressure. I wanted to grab her, to shake the calm, knowing look off her face. But I just stood there, paralyzed. My own phone was dead in a bathroom, but I felt more exposed than ever. Tessa's words echoed in my head. It links through eyes. I walked out of the hospital into the parking garage, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry insects. My car was there, waiting. As I got closer, I saw it. On the driver's side window, written in the thin layer of city grime, was a single word, finger smudged and stark. Observed, I didn't sleep that night. Every shadow in my apartment felt deliberate. Every creak of the building was a footstep. Observed, the word was burned into the back of my eyelids. I fished my shattered phone out of my laptop bag. The screen was a spiderweb of cracks, but it still turned on. The green camera light was dark. For now, I had to know if Lex was lying. I needed to see that code for myself, not the polished version he showed everyone. The raw, ugly guts of it. I still had some old admin credentials from the early development days. Maybe he'd been lazy and never revoked them. It took me 2 hours and 3 cups of black coffee that tasted like anxiety to find a back door into the development server. My hands were shaking so bad I kept mistyping passwords. Finally, I was in. The code streamed past, a river of logic and commands. It was beautiful, in a cold, Lex kind of way. And then I found it. A subroutine, tucked away like a dirty secret. It wasn't part of the main SpecterFilter program. It was a parasite attached to it. Its purpose was simple. Horrifying. It wasn't just collecting generic fear data. It was monitoring specific biometrics. My biometrics. Heart rate variability, micro-expressions caught through the front-facing camera, even pauses in my typing rhythm. It was building a real-time stress signature. For me. And it was time-stamped, logging my reactions from the first day we tested the goddamn thing. From the moment I saw that zombie's skin, Lex knew. He knew the whole time. He watched me get more and more freaked out and he said nothing. He called me jumpy. He called the thing in Tessa's room a coincidence. My own brother. The blood in my ears was a roaring static. I picked up my broken phone. I didn't care about the green light anymore. I called him. He answered on the first ring, voice clipped. Theo, I'm in the middle of a... You're monitoring me. My voice was flat, dead. You have a separate program hooked into the app. You're tracking my stress levels. Why? The silence on the other end was different this time. It wasn't the silence of processing. It was the silence of getting caught. When he spoke again, his voice was low, tight with a strange mix of anger and defensiveness. It was for the project, to optimize the user experience, to see what triggers were most effective. Bullshit! I slammed my hand on the desk. The cracked phone screen bit into my palm. You targeted me. Specifically, you watched me fall apart and you took notes. For your own good, he snapped, the control in his voice finally cracking. You're unstable, Theo. You have been since Lily. I was gathering data to understand, to prove you weren't fit to lead this. Your judgment is compromised by all that guilt. The word hung in the air between us, poisonously final. He'd used my sister, my deepest wound, as a justification for spying on me. The room felt like it was tilting. I couldn't breathe. The line went dead. I sat there, numb. A moment later, my shattered screen lit up. A new text. From Olivia. Trust is such a fragile variable, isn't it? We should talk, away from the code. As I read it, my laptop speaker, which I always keep on mute, emitted a half-second of distorted audio. Just a fragment. A woman's scream. Tess's scream. Then, silence. They think fear is a one-way street. They plant the seed, then sit back and wait for the harvest. But they're wrong. Dead wrong. A 1-second pause. Heartbeat continues. Fear has a way of turning on you. When you stare into the abyss, it doesn't just stare back. It crawls back along your gaze, into your world. The only thing left for me to do now, before it completely consumes me, voice drops to a dangerous whisper, is to jump in first and tear it apart from the inside. The echo of Tess's scream from my laptop speaker seemed to hang in the air long after the sound cut out. It wasn't just in my head. The silence itself felt scarred by it. Olivia's text glowed on my shattered phone screen, a coldly professional lifeline thrown into my personal hell. Away from the code. She knew. She knew about my fight with Lex. She knew I was breaking. This wasn't an offer of help. It was a summons. My first instinct was to run, to get in my car and just drive until the world looked familiar again. But the word "observed" was still smudged on my window. Where could I go that they wouldn't be watching? My own apartment felt like a stage. My phone, even cracked and accusing, was my only tether to whatever this was. I was trapped in a web, and the spider was politely asking to meet. I replied with one word: where? My thumb left a sweaty smear on the cracked glass. Her instructions were specific: a public place, a quiet, high-end coffee shop across town, all soft lighting and ambient jazz. It felt like a different planet. I got there early. My nerves stretched so tight I thought they might snap. I chose a seat in the corner, my back to the wall, a habit I never knew I had. I watched the door, my heart doing a painful thump against my ribs every time it opened. She arrived exactly on time, of course. Dr. Olivia Shaw looked impeccable, a cashmere sweater and tailored pants against the backdrop of anonymous luxury. She didn't look like someone who dealt in digital nightmares. She looked like she was about to discuss a stock portfolio. She slid into the seat opposite me, her eyes doing a quick, analytical sweep of my face. I knew she was registering the dark circles, the pallor, the tiny tremor in my hand as I gripped my coffee cup. "No, Lex?" she asked, her voice calm. "A test. You tell me," I said, the words coming out rougher than I intended. You probably know what he said to me better than I do. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It didn't reach her eyes. Trust is a fragile variable. It tends to shatter under pressure. She took a delicate sip of her water. "What you're experiencing, Theo, is a systemic collapse. You've seen behind the curtain. It's unsettling, I know." "Unsettling?" A bitter laugh escaped me. "You call what happened to Tess unsettling? She's catatonic in a hospital bed, Olivia. Your algorithm did that to her." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze intense. "The algorithm didn't do anything. The algorithm is a tool, a scalpel. It didn't create the fear. It simply revealed it. Tess's own psyche was the canvas. We just provided the paint." She said it with the calm certainty of a physicist, stating a law of nature. There was no malice. There was something worse. A pure, unadulterated curiosity. "The paint," I repeated, my voice a whisper. "The private memories." Her father's voice. "That's not paint. Olivia, that's a violation. Data is neutral," she countered smoothly. "Its application is what holds meaning. And the data we're collecting, Theo, it's breathtaking. The purity of your fear, for instance. It's not a simple, primal thing. It's layered. It's complex. There's guilt, a desperate need for control, a profound sense of responsibility. It's a vintage, a rare, exquisite vintage. I felt the coffee churn in my stomach. I was a vintage to her, a collection of fine traits. I was looking into the eyes of the person who had designed my prison, and she wasn't a monster. She was a connoisseur. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, feeling utterly exposed. "Why meet me?" Her smile widened, just a fraction. "Because the experiment is entering a new phase. The initial data from the general population is robust, but now we need to study resilience, or the lack thereof. We're offering you a choice, Theo. You can continue to be a subject, buffeted by the currents, or you can become an observer. You can help us understand the breaking point. It's a unique opportunity." She was offering me a deal, a chance to get off the dissection table and stand beside her holding a clipboard, to save myself by sacrificing whatever was left of my soul. The worst part was, for a single shameful second, it sounded tempting. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. The calm of the coffee shop felt like a lie. "Go to hell, Olivia." I turned and walked out, half expecting a security guard to stop me. Nothing happened. But as I pushed the door open, my broken phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't need to look to know what it was. Another review. Another rating. The trap wasn't just around me anymore. It was inside me, and they were waiting to see how deep it would sink in. Walking away from Olivia felt like stepping off a cliff. There was no relief, just the sickening sensation of the ground being gone. The deal she offered to become one of them, a clipboard-watching observer of human suffering, clung to me like a stain. The worst part was the logic of it. It made a twisted kind of sense in a world where fear was a commodity. I had to get this thing off my phone. Now, I drove to a sketchy strip mall on the other side of town, the kind of place that smelled of stale fryer oil and desperation. I found a phone repair kiosk tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. A guy with tired eyes and tattooed knuckles looked up from a disemboweled laptop. "Help you? I need this wiped," I said, sliding my shattered phone across the counter. "A factory reset. Nuclear option. I don't care about the data." He picked it up, his thick fingers probing the cracked screen. "Screen's gone. Can probably still do it through recovery mode. $50. Just do it." He plugged it into a cable, his fingers dancing over a keyboard. I watched the lines of code scroll on his monitor, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was it. Cutting the cord. Severing the link. I'd get a burner phone. Disappear for a while. Let Lex and Olivia play their sick games without me. The repair guy's fingers stopped. He frowned. "Huh, 为受工的手指停下了，这就是美." What? The word came out sharp, a gunshot in the tiny kiosk. "It's not taking the command. The wipe sequence keeps aborting. Got some kind of, I don't know, a lock on it. A deep system lock." He tapped a few more keys, his frown deepening. "Never seen anything like it. It's like the OS is fighting me, protecting itself." A cold dread, colder than I'd ever felt, washed over me. It links through touch, Tess's words in the hospital. It wasn't just in the app. It was in the bones of the phone itself. The thing had rooted itself. It had built a home. "Can you break it?" I heard myself ask, my voice hollow. "Not with what I got here. You'd need like NSA level shit. Or..." He shrugged, looking at my phone with a new kind of respect. The kind you give a dangerous animal, or you just gotta destroy the hardware. Completely. Smash the board. Melt the chips. That'll stop it. I paid him the $50, my hand trembling as I took the phone back. It felt heavier now, hotter, a cancerous growth in my palm. I walked out to my car. The city sounds the traffic, a distant siren sounding thin and meaningless. There was no cutting the cord. The cord was plugged directly into my life. I got in, slammed the door, and just sat there in the stale darkness of the parking garage. Destroy the hardware. It was the only way. I could drive to the river, hurl the phone into the deep, dark water, let the silt claim it. But even as I thought it, I knew it was useless. It wasn't about the phone anymore. It was about me. I was the hardware. My fear, my memories, my guilt that was the substrate it was growing on. It was eating the quiet parts, and I was full of quiet parts. My head dropped against the steering wheel. The leather was cool against my forehead. I was so tired, so profoundly tired. The fight was seeping out of me, replaced by a numb, heavy acceptance. This was my life now. A zoo exhibit, a vintage being aged to perfection. A vibration started against my leg, not my broken phone. This was a different, lower frequency. I fumbled in my pocket and pulled out the old, disconnected voice recorder I used for interview notes. A device with no OS, no internet, no camera. Its tiny screen was lit. A single audio file, with no name, was queued up. How? With a feeling of utter doom, I pressed play. It was Lex's voice, filtered through what sounded like a voice changer. Cold and robotic. They're not outside the system, Theo. They're in it. With us. Trust your gut, but not for people. For data. Find the dissonance. The message ended. The recorder screen went black. I sat there in the silent car, the ghost of my brother's warning hanging in the air. He wasn't the enemy. Or, he wasn't just the enemy. He was a prisoner, too, sending messages in a bottle from inside the same digital hell. He was telling me to fight, not with my fists or by running, but with the only thing I had left, that they couldn't completely control, my own mind. Find the dissonance. I started the car. The engine roared to life, shattering the silence. I wasn't going to the river. I was going home. The fight wasn't over. It had just changed. They wanted to observe my fear? Fine. I'd give them a show they'd never forget. The silence in my apartment had a new quality. It wasn't empty anymore. It was charged, waiting. My broken phone sat on the kitchen counter like a cursed artifact. I didn't try to turn it off. I didn't try to hide it. Let it watch. Let it listen. Lex's distorted words. Find the dissonance echoed in the space he'd carved out in my head. He wasn't talking about a bug in the code. He was talking about a lie in their system. A crack. They wanted my fear. It was their data. Their vintage. But what if I gave them something else? What if the fear was a mask, and underneath it, I was building something they couldn't digest? I opened my laptop. I ignored the SpecterFilter server. That was their house, their rules. Instead, I started pulling on the threads Lex had left me, the shell companies, the financial trails. I was a documentary filmmaker, goddammit. Finding the story hidden beneath the surface was what I did. My own fear was a cold knot in my stomach, but I used it. I let it sharpen my focus, let it fuel the frantic clicking and typing. This wasn't about running anymore. This was an excavation. Hours bled together. The city outside my window went dark. I lived on coffee and a terrible vibrating anxiety. And then I found it. The dissonance. It was in the money. A series of perfectly legal, impeccably routed investments into Mirror Image, our studio, all traced back to a venture fund owned by Mr. Ash. But buried under layers of obfuscation, a tiny fraction of that money, less than 0.5%, slipped out. A drip feed. It wasn't going to server costs or salaries. It was being funneled through a series of blind accounts to a private medical research foundation, one with no published papers, no public-facing scientists, just a name, the Ethelred Foundation. And the foundation had one primary beneficiary, listed as a resident consultant, Dr. Olivia Shaw. My breath caught. This wasn't just about building an app. This was a skunkworks. Ash was funding Olivia's private, off-the-books research. The SpecterFilter wasn't the product. It was the data collection tool for something else. Something they didn't want attached to their public names. A private canvas, she'd said. This was it. As I stared at the screen, the air in my apartment changed. The hair on my arms stood up. The smart bulb in my kitchen flickered. Once, then died, plunging the room into darkness save for the cold blue glow of my laptop. From the counter, my shattered phone lit up. The cracked screen glowed a malevolent red. No notification, no text, just a single, pulsating, blood-colored dot in the center, like a heartbeat, like a targeting reticle. They knew I was getting close. The observation wasn't passive anymore. It was a warning, a show of force. A cold sweat broke out on my back, but a strange calm settled over me. The fear was still there, a live wire in my chest, but it was focused. They were reacting. I had poked the beast, and it had flinched. I slowly stood up. My eyes locked on the pulsating red dot. I walked over to the counter. I could feel it now, the presence. Not in the code, not in the hardware, in the signal itself. A consciousness, vast and cold, looking back at me through that cracked lens. "Okay," I whispered, my voice steady in the dark. "You can see me." Good. I reached out and picked up the phone. The glass was cold against my palm. The red dot pulsed faster. "Theo?" A voice, synthesized and genderless, emanated from the speaker. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. A label. I didn't answer. I just held the phone, feeling its weight, its malevolent life. The trap was sprung. I was in the cage with the thing that built it. But for the first time, I wasn't just looking for a way out. I was looking for its eyes. The red dot pulsed. Once, twice, and then the screen went completely black. The apartment was silent again, but the silence was different now. It was the silence before a storm. If tonight was the last time you could use your phone, who would you text? Now, imagine a world where you can't send any messages at all. A world where your every fear, every heartbeat belongs to someone else's private property. This is Theo's reality. As he steps into that gallery of human fear, he discovers the only way out is to go deeper into the heart of the exhibition. Because sometimes, to be free, you must first walk willingly into your cage. The blackout lasted 10 seconds. When the lights flickered back on, the apartment was just an apartment again. The phone on the counter was inert, a piece of broken glass and plastic. But the echo of that synthesized voice, Theo, was etched into the air. It wasn't a question. It was a roll call. And I had answered by not running. Lex's warning was the key. Find the dissonance. I had found it in the money, in the secret research. But that was the external crack. The real dissonance was in me. It was the gap between what they expected and what I could become. They wanted a pure, terrified sample. But I was a messy, contradictory human being. I wasn't just afraid. I was angry. I was grieving. I was determined. They wanted to bottle lightning. But I was the whole damn storm. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, my laptop closed, and I planned. I wasn't going to hack their servers. I wasn't going to expose them to the world. That was playing their game on a board they owned. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted, but poisoned at the source. Me. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I shaved. I put on clean clothes. I looked almost normal, except for the resolve burning in my eyes. I drove to a big box electronics store and bought a new, high-end phone. I didn't flinch when I set it up. I downloaded SpecterFilter the moment it was activated. Back in my apartment, I placed the new phone on the coffee table, screen facing me. I took a deep breath. This was the stage. I was the performer, and my audience was a hungry, invisible god. I opened the app. The familiar AR overlay sprung to life, painting ghostly shapes over my living room. I didn't react. I let the camera see me. I let it read my face. I focused. Not on calming down. That was impossible. I focused on layering my fear. I let the cold dread of being watched rise up, and then I wrapped it in the white-hot core of my anger. I fed it the bitter pill of my grief for Lily, for Tess, for the person I used to be. I let it all swirl together into a toxic, emotional cocktail. It wasn't pure fear. It was something richer, more complex, something I hoped would be indigestible. The app's notification chirped, a sound that used to make me jump. Emotional spectrum, anomalous, purity, compromised, analysis, ongoing. A slow smile touched my lips. Compromised. Good. I was polluting the data stream. I was a bad sample. I kept at it for hours, a mental martial art, consciously crafting my inner state into a weapon. The walls didn't bleed. The lights didn't flicker. They were too busy trying to figure me out. Then, the invitation came. Not a text, not a call. The screen of my new phone dissolved into a simple, elegant graphic. A single, stylized key. Below it, an address I recognized from my research. Ash's private estate, and a time, midnight. It wasn't a threat. It was a summons to the final tasting. I didn't hesitate. I replied by standing up and walking to the door. The trap was closing, but I was the one springing it. They thought they were inviting a specimen in for final analysis. They were wrong. They were inviting a poison pill into their heart. As I stepped out into the twilight, my phone buzzed one last time. A single, final notification. The curator awaits. The gate to Ash's estate was a seamless, 10-foot-high slab of darkened metal that slid open without a sound as I approached, as if the house itself had swallowed me. No guards. No intercom. Just an unnerving, automated welcome. The driveway wound through a manicured nightmare of minimalist landscaping, all sharp angles and raked gravel, under a moon that looked like a cold, dead eye. The house wasn't a house. It was a bunker disguised as modern architecture. A single, vast, windowless structure of concrete and glass. The front door, another massive slab, opened into a cavernous space that stole my breath. It was silent, save for a low, almost sub-audible hum that vibrated in my teeth. The air was cool, filtered, and utterly scentless. It was the air of a museum, or a morgue, and it was a gallery, but the art wasn't on the walls. The walls were the art. They were massive, floor-to-ceiling screens, and on them, in mesmerizing real-time visualizations, flowed the data of human terror. I saw cascading waterfalls of numbers that I knew were heart rates, clouds of color that pulsed with panic, jagged lightning bolt graphs of neural activity, It was beautiful. It was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen. Theo, you came. Mr. Ash stood in the center of the room, a still point in the swirling data. He wore a simple, dark suit, and he looked more like a curator than a monster. Behind him, Dr. Olivia Shaw stood near a console, her expression one of professional appraisal. She held a tablet, her fingers occasionally tapping the screen, making minor adjustments to the nightmare on display. "I received your invitation," I said, my voice steady. It echoed slightly in the vast space. "Of course," Ash gestured to the walls. "We wanted you to see your new home, the source of our most promising acquisitions." His eyes weren't on me. They were drinking in the data. "Your fear, Theo. It has a unique signature, a complexity we rarely encounter. The guilt gives it a remarkable depth. The anger, a thrilling volatility." He was talking about me like I was a wine he was about to uncork. I forced myself to look at the screens, to see the raw, quantified essence of what they had done to Tess, to who knows how many others. One visualization showed a frantic spiking pattern labeled T. Ramirez, Final Collection. It ended in a flat line. "You're sick," I whispered, the words swallowed by the hum. "We are connoisseurs," Ash corrected gently. "We appreciate what others discard. The human animal is so eager to hide its fear, to shove it down. We bring it into the light. We give it meaning." He finally turned his gaze to me, and it was like being scanned by a LiDAR. "And you, Theo, you are our masterpiece in progress." Olivia stepped forward. "The environment is prepared. It's time for the final calibration, Theo. We need to measure your baseline resilience before we proceed." She gestured to a chair in the center of the room. It looked comfortable, almost like a dentist's chair, but it was ringed by discrete sensors and had a sleek silver headrest. A crown of thorns made of technology. This was it. The moment I either became their permanent exhibit or fought back, I had one weapon, the poisoned chalice of my own emotions. I looked at the chair, then back at Ash. "Before I sit," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. A frantic drum they could surely see on their screens. "I have a question." Ash raised an eyebrow, amused. "A last request? An observation," I said, meeting his gaze. I let the fear rise, thick and cloying. I let my hands tremble slightly. I gave them the performance they expected, and then, underneath it, I focused on the one thing I knew they couldn't truly comprehend. Not logic, not data. The simple, messy, illogical reality of my love for my sister. The fact that I missed her, not as a source of guilt, but as a person. I wrapped that warmth around the cold core of my terror like a blanket. "You collect fear," I said, my voice dropping. "But you don't understand it. You think it's an end product. It's not. It's just the shell." I took a step toward the chair. The screens around me flickered, the data stream stuttering for a fraction of a second. A single, anomalous spike of something. Not fear, not anger, shot through the visualization labeled T. Barclay. Ash's smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed the smallest amount. The predator sensing a new, unfamiliar scent in its prey. "Proceed," he said to Olivia, his voice still calm, but with a new, sharp edge. I sat in the chair, the headrest molded to my skull with a soft hiss. The final act had begun. The hiss of the headrest locking into place was the sound of a coffin closing. Wires, cold and precise, touched my temples. The massive screens around me flared to life, and suddenly, I was the main exhibit. My own biometrics painted the room in lurid color. a thundering crimson wave that was my heart, a jagged yellow graph of my breathing, and at the center, a 3D model of a brain, lit up with firing neurons, each flash representing a spike of fear. It was a masterpiece of violation. Begin the final sequence. Ash's voice was serene. He watched the screens with the rapt attention of a conductor before his orchestra. Olivia tapped her tablet, initiating targeted fear protocols, accessing primary memory node. Lily. Night of incident. The world dissolved. One moment I was in the sterile gallery, the next I was there. Rain lashed against the window of my old apartment. The smell of microwave pizza and my sister's strawberry shampoo filled the air. I was 22 again, and Lily, 12 years old and furious, was screaming at me, her face contorted. The memory was no longer a memory. It was a cage, and I was trapped inside. The air grew thick, heavy with a dread I hadn't felt in years. On the screens, my fear metrics went off the charts, a symphony of pure, uncut terror. "This is what they want," a part of me screamed. "Give it to them!" But Lex's voice cut through the panic. "Find the dissonance." The dissonance wasn't in their code. It was in mine. In this very memory, I stopped fighting the memory. I let it wash over me. The guilt, the shame, the helpless rage. But I didn't stop there. I reached deeper, past the pain they were triggering, to what lay beneath. I focused on the feel of the worn carpet under my socks. The sound of the rain, not as a backdrop to a fight, but as a simple, natural rhythm. I looked at Lily, not at her anger, but at the faint dusting of freckles across her nose that she hated. I remembered the specific way she'd roll her eyes before she laughed. This wasn't just a scene of trauma. It was a place. It was my life, and it was filled with a million tiny, undatafiable details. I poured that into the data stream. The love, all tangled up with the loss. The profound, aching gratitude for having known her, mixed with the bottomless sorrow of her being gone. It wasn't one emotion. It was a chaotic, messy human storm. The memory around me flickered. Lily's screaming face wavered. For a second, I saw her not in anger, but looking at me with a quiet, sad understanding. Then the rain-soaked window of my old apartment morphed, the raindrops stretching into long, glowing lines of corrupted code. Back in the gallery, the screens went haywire. The clean, crimson wave of my heart rate shattered into a kaleidoscope of conflicting colors. The brain model wasn't just lit up with fear. It was a fireworks display of overlapping, contradictory signals. A warning siren blared from Olivia's console. "What is this?" Ash's voice lost its serenity for the first time. He took a step toward the screens, his face a mask of confusion and dawning anger. "The data is incoherent. It's not a pure signal," Olivia reported, her fingers flying across her tablet, her composure cracking. "It's contaminated. The subject is intentionally introducing noise. The emotional signature it's paradoxical. The system can't resolve it." I focused harder, pushing every conflicted, unquantifiable feeling I had through the wires. The joy of a memory that also brought pain. The anger that was just love, turned inside out. I was giving them a meal they couldn't swallow, a vintage that was, in fact, poison. The headrest around my skull began to smoke, a sharp, electrical smell cutting through the sterile air. The lights in the gallery stuttered violently. "Shut it down," Ash commanded, his voice sharp with something I'd never heard from him before. Alarm. "It's not responding. The feedback loop is overloading the local servers," Olivia shouted, backing away from her console as sparks erupted from it. With a final, monumental effort, I pictured Lily not as she died, but as she lived. Smiling, laughing, a whole person, not a data point. I let that image, warm and bright and utterly, defiantly real, flood through me. The main screen, the one with my brain model, turned blindingly white. Then, it shattered into a billion pixels and went black. The hiss of the headrest became a dying gasp. The wires retracted. The gallery was silent, lit only by the emergency lights and the dying embers of Olivia's console. I slowly stood up, my legs weak. Ash was staring at the blank screens, his face ashen. He looked empty. Defeated not by force, but by something he simply could not compute. Olivia looked from the ruined console to me, her professional mask gone, replaced by a raw, stunned disbelief. She hadn't just lost an experiment. She'd seen her entire, ordered worldview collapse. I walked to the door, my steps echoing in the cavernous silence. No one tried to stop me. I paused at the threshold and looked back. "You wanted to see what was inside," I said, my voice hoarse but clear. "Now you know." I stepped out into the cool, real night air. It had never smelled sweeter. The drive home was a blur. My body was there, hands on the wheel, navigating the familiar streets, but my mind was elsewhere. It was floating in the aftermath of the explosion I'd caused. Not a physical one, but a conceptual one. I had broken their perfect, sterile machine with the one thing it couldn't process: a messy, contradictory, fully human heart. The news the next day was a quiet, buried snippet in the tech section. Ethelred Foundation, a little-known private research group, abruptly disbands following a reported catastrophic data corruption event. No comments from its principals. Mirror Image Studios was quietly shuttered. Lex was gone. Not a trace. I didn't try to find him. Some bridges are not just burned, they are vaporized. I visited Tess once more. She was sitting by a window, watching birds at a feeder. She didn't speak, but when I placed my hand over hers, she didn't flinch. She turned her palm up and linked her fingers with mine. A tiny, fragile connection. It wasn't a cure, but it was a start. It was a quiet part they hadn't been able to eat. Weeks passed. I got a new phone. A dumb one. It made calls. It sent texts. It didn't have a camera. The silence in my apartment began to feel like silence again, not just the absence of noise. I started going for long walks, feeling the sun on my skin, the wind in my hair, sensations that didn't need to be measured, quantified, or collected. They just were. But I was different. The part of me that had been the glue, the people pleaser, the one who desperately tried to hold everything together, it was gone. It had been burned away in that gallery. In its place was something quieter, harder. I didn't feel the need to fill silences anymore. I didn't feel the need to manage anyone's emotions but my own. One evening, I was cleaning out a closet, trying to build a new life from the wreckage of the old. I found a box of Lily's things. My breath hitched, a familiar pain lancing through me. But it was just pain. It wasn't the overwhelming, data-rich terror they had wanted to harvest. It was mine. A simple, human ache. I opened the box. On top was the old frayed sweater she'd loved to steal from me. I picked it up, the wool soft and familiar, and then I saw it. Tucked into the fold of the sweater was a small, black, unmarked USB drive. My blood ran cold. It hadn't been in there before. I was sure of it. I didn't plug it into my computer. I might be different, but I wasn't stupid. I held it in my palm, this tiny dark shard of my past, now infected with an unknowable future. It was a message, a breadcrumb. From Lex? From whatever remained of the curator? A peace offering? Or a new set of shackles? I walked to the window, looking out at the city. A million lights, a million lives, a million quiet stories playing out in the dark. I closed my hand around the drive, its hard edges pressing into my palm. The fear was still there. It probably always would be, but it wasn't my master anymore. It was just information, and I was learning how to read it. Outside, the night was deep and full of secrets. I stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet, and for the first time, it didn't sound empty. It sounded like a choice.